valley still smokes. Ash drifts like falling snow. Crows wheel above in uneasy silence. Even the scavengers seem afraid. Nobles and peasants lie side by side, cut down without distinction. Torn banners hang from splintered pikes, flapping over blood-soaked soil. A lone Hungarian soldier staggers forward. His mail is torn, his hands shaking, his eyes empty. Behind him, silence. Before him, ruin. Quote, "There now stands no sizable force in Christendom that can withstand them." End quote. Report delivered to the French court, 1241. The Mongols had come like a storm from another world. They moved faster than messengers, struck harder than thunder, and killed with a precision Europe had never imagined. Just as suddenly, they were gone, vanished, as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Europe rejoiced, priests wept, kings praised the heavens. Some called it divine intervention, others the triumph of Christian courage. But those who had seen the slaughter, who had stood in the ashes of cities, knew better than to believe in fairy tales. This wasn't a victory. It was something else, something more humiliating. And the first clues? They were buried in the silence of a campaign Europe tried to erase, like a nightmare it dared not name. Because 20 years earlier, the Mongols had already come before. They had already been here, 2 decades before the real invasion. Georgia, the Caucasus, to the very edges of Hungary. In 1221, 2 of Genghis Khan's most brilliant generals, Subutai and Jayb, rode into Eastern Europe with 20,000 riders. Not as an army of conquest, but to scout the West. And yet, they crushed everyone who stood in their path. The proud Georgians fell, so did the Cumans and their Kipchak allies. And at the Battle of the Kalka River, a united force of Russian princes was annihilated so completely that Russian chroniclers barely dared write about it. They were pinned beneath wooden planks, crushed slowly, inch by inch, their dying cries muffled as the Mongols dined atop their suffering. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a message. And then, just like that, the Mongols vanished. No demands, no tribute, no occupation. Because they weren't here to conquer, they were here to measure. And what they saw was damning. Europe was fractured, disorganized, weak, but not without value. The storm had tested the walls, and 20 years later, it would return to break them. But the truth? Europe was never a priority. Europe may have thought it was the center of the world. The church, the kings, the castles. But to the Mongols, it was a footnote. Because of the real prizes, the ones worth bleeding for, lay in the east. China, Persia, Baghdad. Civilizations of stone and silk. Cities with walls that reached the sky. And libraries that held the knowledge of 1,000 years. Kaifeng, Hangzhou, Samarkand, Baghdad. Places where gold flowed like water, and every conquest brought not just land, but legacy. What did Europe offer? Feuding kings, rotting roads, wooden castles, pride without power. Not worthless, but not urgent. To Genghis Khan and to his son Ugadai, Europe was never the main course. It was a side dish, a curiosity, a land that would be conquered, an eventuality. Because the Mongols didn't just fight for riches, they believed in destiny, that all under heaven, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, was meant to bow before the Khan, even if it wasn't worth the paperwork. So, in 1241, the Mongols returned to Europe, not to scout, but to conquer. It wasn't a warning this time. It was judgment. Subutai, Genghis Khan's greatest general who led the legendary cavalry raid from 20 years before, led a storm of horse and fire across the Carpathians. This time, it was no raid. It was a war machine with centuries of conquest behind it. One army surged into Poland. At Legnica, they crushed the Knights of Europe and left Duke Henry's head on a pike, crowned with his own helmet. Another force tore into Hungary. At the Battle of Mohi, they crossed the Shoyo River under the cover of night, surrounded the Hungarian camp, and turned it into a slaughterhouse. King Bela IV fled. His kingdom burned behind him. Entire regions were left empty, villages gone, populations erased. Europe was stunned. Its armies crumbled before tactics they didn't understand. Feigned retreats, pincer movements, and multi-pronged coordination across hundreds of kilometers. It felt like the Mongols were everywhere, all at once. This was a level of military sophistication never before seen on a European battlefield. This wasn't medieval warfare. It was something else. A war from the future, riding out of the past. And now, the road to Vienna lay open. Nothing stood in their way. Victory was in their grasp. Europe was bleeding and on its knees. And then, a message from the east. Ogadai Khan was dead. The great Khan of the Mongol Empire gone. And with that death, everything changed. Because under Mongol law, tradition was absolute. When a Khan dies, every prince, no matter where they are, must return to the steppe to elect a new leader. No exceptions, no delays. Even conquest had to kneel before custom. Subutai, the war-hardened general, wanted to press on. The road to Western Europe was open. The armies were ready. But Batu, the commander of the Western campaign, refused. He followed tradition. He turned his army east. And just like that, the storm withdrew. Not defeated, not repelled, just preoccupied. And Europe, barely standing, was spared by arguably one of the most important deaths in history. But ask yourself this. What if Ogadai hadn't died? What if Subutai kept marching west? Vienna would fall first, then Prague, then Paris, maybe even Rome. Europe's castles? Stone walls crumble under Chinese siege engines designed for cities far stronger than these. Europe had knights. The Mongols had artillery. And as they advanced, they'd bring the defeated with them. Hungarian levies, Polish prisoners, Slavic auxiliaries, just like they did in Persia, just like they always did. This is how the Mongols conquered, not with numbers, but with a ruthlessly effective system. Divide, break, absorb, repeat. And Europe? Fractured, petty, divided by faith and blood feuds. There was no grand alliance, no last stand, no savior on the horizon. Had the Mongols stayed, there might not be a Europe left to write this story. Just another Khanate, another page in a different history book, written in blood and smoke and silence. In the end, Europe didn't survive because it was brave. It didn't survive because it was strong. It survived because it was irrelevant. Across the mountains, the Mongols saw greater prizes. China's dynasties, Persia's wealth, Baghdad's golden libraries. They didn't spare Europe. They simply didn't care enough to finish it. No grand victory, no miracle. Just the quiet mercy of being too small to matter. And for once in history, indifference saved a continent. History remembers what it's told, but we're here to tell what it forgets. Like and subscribe to see what they left out.